am very excited about this interview. I'm talking with Max Bruening, who is the winemaker for Ponzi Vineyards in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, one of my most favorite places in the world. I love Napa Valley where I live, but boy, if anyone told me I couldn't live in Napa, I would be in the car on my way to the Willamette. So, Max, nice to meet you. Hi.
It's pleasure to meet you as well, Karen. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, it's Share and Pair Sundays time, and I thought I might start out by asking you, why is wine important? You're a winemaker. Why is wine important?
That's a very loaded question.
I thought I'd
Um,
start out easy for you.
yeah, right. But it's a good one to ask. I think, at its core, wine is something that humans have been a part of for over 8,000 years, right? So to be a part of a craft that is so natural to what we do, especially in an age of technology where things are changing so rapidly, to kind of ground yourself into a craft or a true artisanal, you know, job or craft, is pretty fulfilling for me, and I think for a lot of people, to be a part of a process that is natural, that is brings you home to the land, that gets you into a cellar, science, art. I mean, for me, that's kind of long-winded, but it's a very hard one to answer. I think it's the culmination of love and passion and perseverance and patience, because that is very much what we have to be good at. And ultimately, you end up with a product that can be shared with people, with your friends and family, and it brings people together. And that's the point. That's the goal.
I wish I said that. That was beautifully said. That was really beautifully said.
Thank
You
you.
know, yeah, I sometimes think to myself that wine is one of the last true things. I mean, in a world that is mechanized to madness, you can barely get out of your pajamas without your cell phone. It is so wine is very old school. It makes you humble in the face of nature. And it is the way that you take nature into your body. It's categorically different than, I don't know, even a book that you put up on the shelf. You're really participating with nature. And there's something magical in that I think even if we can't consciously describe it, I think we feel it.
Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, in a lot of people's jobs in their lives, it runs a very horizontal kind of pace with peaks and valleys. What's cool about our line of work is it's cyclical, right? So our lives are kind of defined by these very interesting moments in the year, be it, bud break, right? And then into flowering. That kind of kicks off everything. You feel this kind of energy come alive, and it's very seasonal. I think that's probably the easiest way, which is intuitive. I understand that it's farming, but the best way to capture it is it's a very seasonal driven line of work. And I had a mentor at one point in my life describe it as like hibernation, and waking up from a hibernation, right? And throughout the course of a year, you're slowly coming alive as your vineyards are coming alive, as bud break happens, flowering, and then, set and veraison, lag to everything. And you get to the point where it's time to go. It's time to harvest this fruit. And that's when you're the most alive, right? And you get through it. And what's remarkable is literally in a day's time, it's over. Now, there's always stuff to do after. We are always very busy, but it's a defining moment where you've gotten through the season, and then you kind of go back to sleep. Your wines go into élevage. They lay down, they rest, they're well taken care of, and checked in on. But it's a cool line of work to be in when you think about it that way. Is there's a lot of defining moments, and I think that resonates with a lot of people.
When I moved to Napa Valley from New York, I did so with a kind of unproven belief that somehow just through osmosis, I would become a better writer about wine because obviously I'm not a winemaker. But I was completely unprepared for, as you're saying, this incredible cyclical energy. I mean, even here, I mean, no one in the little town of St. Helena is much removed from a winemaker. And every year when they're nervous, we're all nervous. It's like, oh my God, it's
Yeah,
been,
yes,
and around the harvest, everybody, even in the grocery store, the checkers are like, oh my God, how's the harvest going? Um,
yeah,
and and maybe we forget that wine um, supports literally thousands of rural communities, the whole rural community, not just the winemakers and the vintners, but that kind of cyclical psychological energy takes over everybody in the whole community. It's very cool.
yeah. And I'm glad you point that out because how I describe it is most people see the fruit on the vine and the glass with the wine, right? And it's two ends of a spectrum without really any realization of what's happening in between, and the work that is done, and the devotion that um, incredible groups of people come together to accomplish. But then you take it the next step, which I really love, is amplifying it out into a community driven experience, right, where it is solidarity at its truest form, and people are there to support one another. And when you boil it down to regions like the Willamette Valley just only 5 decades ago, I mean, that's what propped it up, right? You needed that community, you needed the support, and then you can take it even further, Napa, Sonoma, and then Old World, right? Um, but yeah, to realize that, I think that's the true takeaway, is you see that while you're there, and you feel part of that community. And that's what we need as producers, to have that support, because at the end of the day, it is farming, right? What we are doing is farming, and there's this idea because it's wine, it's something else, and it isn't. But it is magical, so you can't argue that one. uh,
That's why, in part, we, Gino Colangelo, Kimberly Charles, and I created both Come Over October and Share and Pair Sundays because we wanted people to feel participatory. We wanted them to remember what had been kind of a lost narrative, which is very simple, but it's the idea that wine connects us to each other and connects us to nature. And and the simple way of participating is simply to get a wine and invite someone over. Doesn't have to be a big dinner party, but um, there's a reason why people always want to stand in a kitchen. And
yes.
there's a reason why most wine does not come in single serving containers, except on the airlines, but we'll leave the
Yeah, right.
airlines to the side for a minute, right? Because from the beginning of time, wine was like food, was meant to be taken in the presence of others.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Well, tell me what's happening at Ponzi. You've been there for a number of years now, and Ponzi was sold a couple of years ago to
Yep.
Bollinger Champagne, one of the great champagne houses. I hope this means that you get to drink an unlimited amount of Bollinger, as
I
well as your own
I wish
Willamette.
it was unlimited. Yeah, but we are treated very well. I will say that. Yeah. Um, yeah, I've been with Ponzi since 2016. So this will actually be my 10th vintage here. I had the honor to work under Louisa for so many years, and prior to the acquisition, Dick, her father, was still very much in the picture in terms of coming over to the winery and kind of putzing around, which was always great, to have him there because we could ask questions or he would help us fix something because it was still very much, family owned and operated. And, but yeah, going into the acquisition, the changes that have taken place are not monumental. I mean, really, if anything, it's the resources now that we have to continue the legacy, the pioneering legacy that was established and um, did so well for this valley and the family. With Dick and Nancy, kind of starting it all, and then Louisa, Maria taking over and continuing that for their parents, and then myself and my colleague Julia, who's our working into our viticulturist role here. It's that's what we love to do is continuing that legacy and driving the wines into ultimately their next stage. Right, we have a lot of our own vineyards that we are farming, that we are actually in our third and certifying year of organics, but we've been farming sustainably, since day one. And all of that work and that effort is really translated into these wines, which makes it even that much more interesting because both myself, Julie, we've had the opportunity to see these vineyards come up, to see these vineyards evolve and interact with our awesome soil profile that we have here in the Laurelwood District AVA. So, it's an ever evolving process, winemaking, viticulture, and as winemakers, as viticulturists, we need to do that as well. We can't be stagnant. We can't pretend that we've figured it out and we can do it, because it's almost a regression at that point. We have to keep going. And so having the resources that we do is wonderful. Having this amazing team that we have both on the production side and our hospitality and administrative side. It's the new era for Ponzi, which is great. It's a reimagining, so.
I think it's almost a whole new era for the Willamette Valley. When you think about Dick Ponzi, David Adelsheim, David Lett, these were, pioneers whose success was not guaranteed when they started in the
Correct, yeah.
late 60s and early 70s. In fact, a lot of the sort of vibe about Willamette was that, good luck, guys, you'll never do it. It's
Fool's
just,
errand.
yeah. And then, if you think about the Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays coming from the Willamette today, I do think that in the Wine Bible, between the first edition and the second edition, the whole chapter changed dramatically. Because the first chapter I was like, maybe one day, but I don't know. It's not really there yet. And the second edition, rather, I was like, oh, you can't believe how good these wines are. You must try them. Yeah. Something happened. What happened?
Well, I think what's great is you have that longevity, that exposure, which is great because you've seen the evolution over the time, right? And I think I'm going to kind of fast forward and then bring it back. But as the third generation of winemakers, me being part of that third generation, what we're recognizing is, understandably, we have a great foundation from what the first and second generation winemakers have set up for us, right? In terms of crafting these beautiful wines and having the vineyards in the ground as long as they have. And most of us have been at our respective wineries for a handful of years where we've had the opportunity and the honor to learn from the second gen. But I think what we're realizing is that how wine was made over the last few decades is not necessarily how we can still make wine, right? It goes back to that ever evolving kind of concept where how they were making things then, we're getting stuff right now, So I think that's might have been what you were seeing is there was a lot of struggle right? There were a lot of years of just making the best wines they possibly could with what they had, and that wasn't that much. But then they'd have those every odd few years that they would just nail it. And I think the ones that were paying attention, that were recording what they were doing, going back and reading in on their journals, and then applying what worked and what didn't, were the ones that truly pioneered and evolved. And I think where that switch in the wine Bible may have happened is, climatically, things were working in our favor. Um, Using Chardonnay as an example, after the efforts of David, bringing in, the Dijon clones, and those eventually making their way into the ground, and us moving away from heritage clones, all of a sudden it was like, oh, we have Chardonnay now. We can make these wines. And then I think just the evolution climatically and then stylistically, getting other people in the valley that weren't native, that brought different styles, different education, different ideas, and that coupled with Oregon's community, which we still very much have, has allowed us to evolve together, right? Evolve as a community, evolve as an industry, rather than separate and treat everything as if it was just a business. We are still very much intertwined with one another, asking questions, leaving your ego at the door, and presenting a group of people with, a troubled wine, and be like, look, I just couldn't wrap my mind around this, and this was the result. Like, did you guys have these problems? And there are not a lot of industries that have that. There's still, not a lot of wine regions that are still doing that. And so I have to, commend Oregon for sticking together even to this day, and moving this program along. So
I think that's very true. I mean, whenever I go to the Willamette Valley, I'm really struck by how tight the community is, and how interdependent it is, and also how much every winemaker wants success for every other winemaker. Um, it's the industry really raised itself up by this extraordinary feeling of collegiality, and we're in it togetherness. It's really been quite amazing. And I think for the world, as Oregon Pinot Noir in particular, although recently Chardonnay is skyrocketing in quality too, but I think Oregon, and specifically Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, put the word elegance back into the Pinot Noir equation. And I want to ask you, what is elegance in wine?
Oh, that's another loaded question. You got the good ones. I think for me, which I resonate with, because I love elegant Pinot Noirs. I really do. From and I'm sorry, I'm pausing, because I'm really starting to cycle through and thinking of this from the winemaking side, but then also the artistry. Like, I think in many years past, we were working to kind of combat the elements, and try to get things out of these wines that we might not necessarily have been able to do if all the conditions were perfect, right? Extraction via, punch downs, pump overs, barrel selection, right? That, either drove a wine for what it was, or potentially, filled in areas that we just couldn't quite get there with fruit, either from a vit side or a winemaking side. I think looking at the wines now in the past few years is, because we aren't necessarily combating those challenges like we were in the past, it's allowing these wines to take a new shape, a new evolution, and that evolution perhaps is elegance. I think it's site dependent. I think it's also winemaker influence as well, because everybody's got their style, everyone's got their art. But tying it into Ponzi, what the family did so well early on was seeing forward, right? They were planting on, north facing slopes when everyone's like, what are you doing? Like, having vineyards that are facing directly east, and here we are, where we are getting much warmer. And so these higher plantings, these east facing sites are really coming in
Mm.
in a way that I think some people don't have, right? And it creates its own expression. And I think that expression is this elegance, you know, and I know you've got the Aurora with you today, but that's a great example. You know, it's a higher elevation site, 4 blocks of Chardonnay, half of which are own rooted, the other half are grafted onto rootstock. It's faced directly east. It comes in a little bit later, and that allows us to kind of craft these wines with intention, recognizing that, you know, this isn't a quote unquote elegant site, because that's always how I see Aurora. Um, for me, it's kind of lacy and, you know, and has some beautiful energy, but it's a bit ethereal, right? Rather than, you know, broody or broad shoulders. It's a little bit more soft, and I see it as kind of waves. So it's a hard question, because it's like to each their own, right? Like, who am I to tell somebody that their interpretation of elegance is wrong? Um, but I
Although,
think we
you
can
know,
all go ahead, please.
I was just going to share that one of the best quotes I have ever heard or was ever said to me was by a Willamette Valley winemaker who said, when you drink a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, you should feel like Grace Kelly just walked into the room. And I thought, ooh, that gets close. That's,
That's elegance.
that's
Yeah.
elegance.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's not wrong. No.
And the way you describe movement, of course, um, I think elegance has a certain choreography.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not bam, bam. It is.
It's
It's
symphonic.
flowing.
Yep. Yep. It's highs and lows, but it's always on a trajectory, right? And it's going to an ultimate, you know, goal or destination. But I think that, you know, to take it a step back, what was so awesome about the Valley is there's so many different representations of Pinot Noir based off the diversity of our landscape, our soils, and then the handful of winemakers that are here that are coming from all different backgrounds. Um, a lot of which aren't technically trained, which is cool, because then, you know, it's a whole different mindset of how you interpret wines, how you approach a vintage, how you approach, you know, any kind of, you know, barrel selection or vessel selection, to go even a little bit more, you know, broader scope. Um, it brings a sense of diversity to the valley, which ultimately translates into the wines, which allows, as a consumer, an awesome opportunity to really get a foothold of what we're doing here. And, you know, you mentioned it, the Chardonnay is like, you know, still all the winemakers here, like, come on, consumers, please, like, please see and taste what we're doing, because we love the Chardonnays here, and they're so unapologetically Willamette Valley, unapologetically Oregon. I think stylistically, if you're into white Burgundy, is great. Here's a close second, you know, or in some people's minds, first. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal, is just to make wines that people absolutely adore and, you know, can't get enough of. So
Do you think that story is not yet well known by consumers? Or
in
maybe
terms of
not enough?
Chardonnay,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it starts with education,
Mm.
right? And that's where we turn to our colleagues in you know, in distribution or in restaurants, SOMs, restaurant owners. If we can get them on board, um, that's where it kind of starts. You know, people traveling to the region, you know, it's here, right? It is completely accessible, and through various channels, we've made a lot of Oregon wine accessible to, you know, the national market. I think, and this is me and me alone, not influenced by anything, is I think a lot of folks have this idea of what Chardonnay is, and
Mhm.
it's what Chardonnay was.
Mm.
And I also think it's kind of just a lack of understanding of what we're doing here, and stylistically what that translates. I think when people have our Chardonnays, and I can speak to this personally just because I've poured a number of events of, they're like, you know, I don't really like Chardonnay. And it's like, okay, no, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to force anything on you, but I insist at least try it. You can pour it out or spit it out. Like, it's not going to hurt my feelings. And a lot of times people are like, oh, this is very different than the Chardonnay I know. And I'm like, I know, because it's Oregon. And it's kind of like the Riesling thing. I don't drink Riesling because they're sweet. It's like, well, okay, they don't call it the noble varietal for nothing. You got a range, right? And I think that's just through the education of bringing to light what the diversity within varietals are or is, and styles of winemaking, what that looks like, what that tastes like. And it's just education, really. So
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, being in the kind of communications education
I
business.
mean, you're doing great things. We need more people like you, so
Well, Share and Pair Sundays and Come Over October, we feel super proud of, because the narrative about wine, to me, had kind of gone down a wrong track.
yep.
It started to just be a conversation about alcohol, and to me, wine is more than alcohol. It's threaded into this rich tapestry of culture, a culture of places, religion, art, food. I mean, it is so much more than just alcohol. And also, wine has social value, as we've been saying, right? It brings people together. It supports nature. It's taking care of the land. It supports rural communities. It is absolutely an entity with social value. And so we've been very excited that people not only have wineries like Ponzi been very supportive of what we're doing, but people all over the country are participating. They're inviting friends and neighbors and colleagues to come over and share some wine, and writing to us, telling us
Yes.
all the fun things they're doing. And so it's very heartwarming to us that people are participating, and being, in a sense, the word that comes to mind is nurtured by that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's a celebration, right? It's people need incentive, and what you're providing is the incentive. We're just kind of coming in with the wine
With the good
to
stuff.
bring it all together. Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right. And the idea that, well, I guess the challenge that we're all facing within this industry of this kind of alcohol, right? But yes, there's alcohol in it, but that's not what it's about, right? That's not what we're trying to do here. We are extremely founded in the understanding of what wine truly is, and that's everything that you just described. And I think it's cool to share the legacy of the Ponzi family, because at its core, that's what that was about. And then over 50 years later, 50, where we're at 55 now, but 4 years ago we were acquired by Boulanger, which, I mean, same thing, right? So to have such a connection that is founded on the idea of creation, right? Creating what we're creating to bring people together for celebratory reasons, or, like you said, just a conversation, right? Like, how many good ideas were spawned by over a bottle of wine or a glass of wine or two, and that's what makes it worth it, right? That's why we're in it. So,
Well, Max, you have been just great to talk to.
yeah,
I'm
thank
so
you.
glad that we now know each other. Next time I come to the Willamette, I'm coming to visit you, my friend.
Please do. You're always welcome.
Thank you, and thank you again for participating in Share and Pair Sundays and Come Over October. It means a lot to the whole culture of wine in America when wineries step up and remind people that there's inherent goodness here, and that we all can participate. You can't always participate in a lot of stuff, but wine you can really personally participate in, and experience the joy and beauty of. So thank you, Max. I really appreciate it.
I'm honored to be a part of it. Thank you for including me. I really value what you're doing and the efforts that you're making, because it's needed, right? We're navigating a lot of headwinds, and this is one of them. So I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Pleasure.